It's time for another edition of the Business of Sports, as we are joined every Wednesday by a longtime NHL player agent. He's involved in hockey, been involved in lots of other sports. Heck, started in the movie business as Ritch Winter joins us once again. Ritch, how you doing, man?
Love the warm weather. It's awesome.
Oh, it's great, man.
Car's a mess, but the weather's good.
Do you wash it by hand or do you go to the car wash?
My dad was a funeral director. Every time I have a chance to wash a car, I love washing it. There's nothing more thrilling, to me, more fulfilling than taking it and getting it cleaned up. Nobody can do it better than I can.
So you do it your dad was a funeral director?
Yeah. No,
so did you ever go, did you ever have to go with them and see dead bodies?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I remember driving through Peter's Drive-In in Calgary when I'd pick up bodies at the Foothills Hospital and, freak them out a little bit at the wicket. But I think funeral directors, to a degree, are some of the funniest people I ever met because it's a very difficult. It's just a difficult environment to work in.
Yeah.
But the hardest part and the most, the hardest part is the anatomical stuff, the operational stuff. But it's dealing with the families and dealing with the challenges, the troubles they have. There's a lot of really interesting elements to it, but wasn't for me because as much as I tried marketing, Dad didn't like you kill them, we chill them, or you stab them, we slap them. None of those things seemed to work, and you just had to take it as it came,
So now I'm just curious because we'll get to Business of Sports in a second, but it's a funeral director. So would he were you guys in charge of who does the embalming? Who does all that stuff?
I didn't do any of that. My dad did that. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I guess he must just get used to it after a while.
It's no different than operating. I mean, a lot of people operate on cadavers for purposes of medical research. It's
right.
It's not like you're live dancing around when they're doing open heart surgery. So it's very similar to that. But that part didn't really entice me much. I had more interest in sports, and those guys really weren't that good at sports.
Yeah, I would think not.
No,
so I would get it. Now, here we're 9 days away from the NHL trade deadline, Ritch, and some years you'll have a few clients who are, they know they're not getting traded. There's lots of players who know for sure. Leon Draisaitl does not go to bed at night thinking he's getting traded, right? Zach Hyman. Now, there are other guys maybe, right? Like the Oilers, we've seen teams move out guys to bring in guys now in a salary cap world, so it can happen. And then there's other players that are like, hey, I know I'm getting traded, right? I'm a pending UFA. Our team's out of it. Some of them are really excited. The range of motions, I'm sure, are tough, but how involved do agents get around trade deadline?
Not much. It depends on if you're actively involved in a trade that could lead to a contract extension. Sometimes that's important. We're not that involved. They don't keep us too much in the loop. I may be checking in if I have a player who's requested a trade,
right?
But not too much.
What about players who are going to get traded but have no trade clauses, right? Or no movement clause?
That gets more interesting, right? Because there's no such thing as a no trade clause, right? Because ultimately, they're on paper, but it's like the contract. The contract you sign with anybody is not worth the paper it's written on if the handshake's not as valuable. But at the end of the day, they come to you and say, look, we're not interested. We don't really like you. Basically want to move you. You'll have some control over team A and B.
Right.
But you're not going to have control over trade. It's a fantasy.
Yeah. So, because if you had a player, and I'll use Jeff Skinner, for instance, in Edmonton, right? They look at Jeff Skinner and the fit doesn't seem like it's great depending on who you talk to. Now he does have a full no movement clause, right? He's never been in the playoffs. He wants to be in a playoff team. So he might, if you guys want to trade me, well, then find a playoff team, and there might not be a playoff team that works. So if one of your players, a team's like, well, we're not going to play you down the stretch. You're going to sit in the press box every night. You're not going to get in the playoffs. If that's one of your clients, you've always talked about chase opportunity, not money. Well, your opportunity there is you're not going to play. How happy will you be? Do you have to kind of walk them through that? Have you ever had a player, who's been in a situation like that where the team might not want to keep him, but he likes being there?
Yeah, I haven't really. Usually that guy's just gone, so we don't really deal with it. No, not the situation you described. And it's tough for that situation to unfold because if they can put Jeff Skinner in the press box or send him down, they're still eating $2 million.
So they can't send him down because he has no move, right? No trade they could, but not no move.
Right. So at the end of the day, why these teams do this, I have no idea. They get suckered into it all the time and put themselves in real restrictive spots. But yeah, I don't see him getting moved. Not to a playoff team. No one's eaten that cap hit for that level of performance unless somebody likes him better than we do or the others do. But I just don't know. I think it's just players are within their right to say no. It just depends on the situation. Do you want to finish strong? Everybody knows from a behavioral science perspective, we all remember what we saw last. That's why the guy who had a terrible season, had a great playoff, gets $4 million when he's worth $1.5 million. That's why the guy who finished strong down the stretch on a non-playoff team, because that's what, geez, if he's as good as he was those last 12 games, you know.
Yeah.
And they don't realize the 12 games are not necessarily representative. It's like free throw shooting. A guy shoots 80% from the floor. You don't expect him to go up. He doesn't have an 80% chance. He has his 42% chance. It just happened that he went on the run. And so I think this time of year is important. You know, I've talked to a couple of my clients who won't be traded, but are not playing in a position that I think is effectively helps reward them for how capable they are. I got guys playing on the third line, should be, you know, scored 30 plus goals, shouldn't be there. But I'll tell you, at the end of the day, you just say to them, look, finish strong, get 6 goals in those 9 or 10 playoff games, you'll be fine.
And now you've talked about what they know, and that's probably why players who are on a Stanley Cup winner, you know, like their value is perceived much. He's going to come in, he's going to help with all culture, and maybe in some cases they do. I don't think you can discount it. In some cases, maybe it gets overrated a little bit in other cases, but it's definitely a thing. I don't think we can sit here and debate it's not. So how do you use that to your advantage then? Sometimes, like when you have a client like that, I'm assuming you use all of those things when you're having discussions with teams, and do they come up as often as maybe we think they do?
Not that much. I think it's funny when you go into, especially on free agency, you go to July 1st, you barely have time to finish a cup of coffee before everything's happening and unfolding so fast. You're not going into a lot of detail. They've done their homework.
Okay.
Maybe comes into play when you're doing an arbitration because playoff performance has an impact. Arbitrators have said that. A little bit of an impact, but I know, you just know, like, I mean, if you've got a player as tenacious as an Andrew Mangiapane, who played, you know, is a really good player, plays both ways, plays hard, hasn't really been in the playoffs, right?
Yeah.
Now he goes on a long run with the Washington Capitals and picks up 6 goals in 24 games, 10 goals in 24 games. He's now answered that bell. So you look at Andrew, generally played in the top 6, played a little more power plays, playing in Washington on a little better team. That might erase any doubts players have, teams have that, you know what, maybe he's not 35 like he was that one year, but he's probably 20, 25. And look what he did in the playoffs, Jason. We're going to be there if it's Carolina. We're going to be there if it's Florida.
Yeah.
What do you think they want?
Yeah. So that adds, well, and the fact that, if Washington adds a third line center that everybody talks about, well, then suddenly anybody who gets to play with better players, your chance of playing better improve.
I don't want to, and third line center is probably an area that the Capitals could really
look at. I think if you look at it, that's the one area that, they don't have many weaknesses on that team. That's a really good team, but that would be one area I think they would be looking to improve on. Lars Eller isn't the Lars Eller who won Stanley Cup. He just isn't, right?
No,
It's 6 years later.
He's skilled, but
he's just slower.
He's slow and he's limited. But at the end of the day, there's nobody happier than me, Andrew Mangiapane, if they actually pull a trade off like that.
The whole, you talked about how the agents don't do a whole bunch at this time. But once a trade happens, right? And if you have a client who's never been traded before, then I'm guessing those next 24 hours, 36 as an agent become very important. And okay, you know what? Not maybe even dealing with him, but dealing with his family, his wife, because he's gone, right? He gets traded. He packs up his bag, gives her a kiss, kisses the kids. He's gone now to whichever city, and they've got to clean it up. So do you have a team? How does that work to help the families of them during a mid-season trade?
Well, we have a concierge, group in our office that takes care of all that stuff. They've seen every single problem you have. They know how to move cars. Teams are very helpful on that. It's really not that difficult.
Okay.
It becomes, what's more challenging is the Devon Shores of the world, who are up and down.
Right.
Gets an apartment in Iowa, thinking he'll be there quite a bit of the year. Then he gets called up. He never gets called back. Now his family's coming up, living with him in a hotel, trying to figure all of those dynamics out. That's probably the hardest part, when families are in a level of uncertainty.
Right.
And they're, they got a 7-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old boy.
And if they're in school, well, then you can't even move. Right?
Yeah, it's those kind of things. People don't think about it. I sit at home, I always tell the players, this is a really bummer you got traded. And then I just go home, right? I've never experienced it. I don't know what it'd be like. Imagine I don't even know how my family would handle it. Well, we're moving to Washington. Like they've never had to be
Yes.
exposed to that. It's a lot harder than people think.
Yeah, I think, well, that's why the first time trade, like players talk about that first time, it's just the unknown, you don't know. And we see lots of players who the first time they get traded to a new team, they don't all acclimatize instantly. Yeah. Right. And then all of a sudden it's, well, we brought you in, you're a top 6 forward and you haven't scored in 10 games. And now all of a sudden the guy's got way more pressure on himself and it becomes a real snowball effect. How about in having seen so many players deal with it? Do you have advice on why you get guys on the best way to adjust to a mid-season trade?
There's no magic formula. I don't have one because you don't know how the coaches react. There's so many biases in this sport. Like I have 47 All-Star Game appearances, 6 Vezinas, 2 Hart trophies, a Norris Trophy, 42 Stanley Cup rings, won by guys who were waived and cleared, bought out. Here's $500,000, go home. And that one case, Marty Straka went from being bought out to getting 92 points the next year, 4th leading scorer in the league. So you just don't know. I mean, the coaches are always right. I've never met an inch coach isn't wrong. They're always right because what happens is they think Marty Straka is too small.
Right.
They put him on the 4th line. He plays 8 minutes. He can't score anymore, he says. Well, of course he can't score. So he makes himself right. And then, of course, he tries that kid that we all know is way out of his element. And he tries him long enough that he ends up with 4 power play goals over 30 games. He's coming. And it's just, you just don't know how a coach is going to react. That's why when we ask, when I encourage players, can't force somebody, encourage players, if we're into a situation where we've got 2 or 3 choices in free agency, I want you to talk to the coach. You make the decision.
Okay.
Because ultimately it takes about 5 minutes for a player to figure out this guy gets my game.
Right.
I'm going there. That also takes me off the hook, right? Because when he says, well, why did we go to Pittsburgh? Well, what do you mean? You picked it.
Yeah. Well, because you're right. You don't control the ice time and you don't control the relationship between a player and his coach. And
we actually can do that. And that's another segment. But at the end of the day.
Whoa. Well, maybe we'll take a break and we'll come back to that next because we'll have Todd. We'll have 2 agents on and talk about how you can impact the coach. I'm sure like anything there's, I know you study a lot on psychology and different things like that, and right in conversations and how to approach things, right? Like those are things you learn over time now that you didn't know when you came into the business.
Well, it's true, but one thing I've learned, I could care less what the general manager thinks about my player. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, the coach.
If the coach doesn't like him, so Marion, you got to talk to Quenneville before we sign. You have to have a feel. And now that's when you have a choice. Sometimes you don't have a choice and you just got to deal with what you got. But ultimately that's really important. And players just are smart. Like they know coaches and they just know those things. And, I've been in situations when I was younger where general managers love this guy. But Grant Fuhr is a good example. Or not Grant Fuhr, sorry, Dominique Haché. The general manager, Jerry Meehan, loved him. He saw him stop so many pucks in a 1-0 loss to the Russians. He saw 62 shots or something. He said, I've seen this guy play. There's no better goalie in the world. Muckler gets the job, trades for Grant Fuhr, right? His go-to guy from Edmonton. Dom's not playing.
Yeah.
He's never going to be the starter when Grant's there. Grant gets hurt. And Dom got like 3 shutouts in 5 games and the rest we're fairly familiar with. But that's a bias. Now, Muck always took credit. Ritch, I discovered him. Well, yeah, you discovered him because somebody got hurt. But at the end of the day, you just don't know. And sometimes you just have to do more research, coach to player, than GM to agent, because the latter one, irrelevant.
Ritch Winter joined us. Todd Reynolds will join us next. We continue on more. Of course, we're leading up to trade deadline, so we got a lot of agent talk and some stories and some thoughts about the game leading up to trade deadline and good and bad stories next on the Gregor Show, presented by PlayAlberta.ca. It's the business of sport with Ritch Winter. Jason Gregor, Ritch Winter here on Sports 1440, sports1440.ca, Oiler Nation, YouTube, Facebook, and X. Hope you are having a wonderful Wednesday afternoon. Hey, it's not. We got a little stretch here of decent weather. You're not free. Heck, I had the windows open my house all last night. It was unreal. So fresh in the morning. So it's a nice.
I asked Todd how it's going out at his place with 300 feet of snow.
Paris,
Ontario.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a sec. The only negative about the hot weather right now is that the Blades of Steel pond hockey tournament had to be postponed, unfortunately, out at Cattail Crossing. So I know for the teams that were registered, that's unfortunate, but you can't play on the pond when there's a chance of falling through the pond. If you know what I'm saying. So that's not ideal. Anyway, let's welcome in player agent from Rays Sports, Todd Reynolds, joins us once again. Todd, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Jason. Thanks for having me, Ritch. Nice to see you again. It's been a few hours.
Yeah, it's been a few hours. I hope you enjoyed those few hours.
How much snow you got?
We've had quite a bit in Ontario, actually. Old-fashioned Canadian winter is what the Ontarians are referring to this winter as.
Okay.
But I don't know. I mean, if you're north of the city, maybe a couple of feet in the last few weeks. I mean, that's a lot of snow for us. So
Now, do you have a snowblower, Todd, or are you a shoveler?
I actually have a country property with a Jeep that has a snowplow on the front. It's next level, Jason. You get to stay warm. You turn on the heated seats and steering wheel, and you plow snow. It's beautiful. So you're hoping for snow when you have that sort of setup. It's been nice.
Yeah, it's kind of sounds soft to me, but hey, I get it. That's we'll see.
Todd was a goalie. Todd was a goalie.
It definitely is.
Now, Todd, I know that I don't think I was looking at your agent, your player list, and I don't think you have any guys that are like, on the trade target boards or those trade bait boards or anything like that. But do you have players? Do they call you to, hey, are you hearing? What do you think? Or does it depend if a guy's really, worried about it? Or do you have any players who say, hey, Todd, you know what? Like, my name's not out there. Can we get it out there? Like, does that ever work that way?
Yes, it does. I mean, I think that's rare. I don't know about Rich's experience, but in mine, I'd say that's more the exception than the rule. Usually it's either by surprise, Jason, where it catches everyone off guard, or there's some leaks, various ways that those take place, but where you have an indication that something may happen with your client, and of course then it does, and you're not surprised. But oftentimes you just look at the team, don't you? You look at just what's happening with a given team, and you say, well, there's going to be some movement here, and if your player's a good player on that team, and depending on his contractual status, he may be likely to be moved.
Now, one of the guys you have who just signed a big contract in Chicago is Tyler Bertuzzi, and that season hasn't gone the way they wanted. Seth Jones last night didn't pull any punches talking about his team. The shot attempts in that game, I think, were like 93-36 or something crazy, losing to Utah. When you have a player who signs in a situation, and maybe it's not going as well, from a team perspective, and then obviously, from a player perspective, do you talk to them more during the season because it's been such a frustrating season, or does it lessen the conversation?
I think it depends on the personality, Jason. I mean, hockey players are people, so they're really no different there in terms of how they handle these sorts of experiences that they're going through. Some of them are very matter of fact. Hey, go to work, punch the clock, have a good attitude, be a good teammate. You can't control those things, sort of that type of approach. And then there's others that are more maybe emotional about it, or are more, thinking about alternatives. But I think generally when a player gets to a certain point in time in their career and experienced and mature, they understand the realities of playing in a given organization, depending where they are in the cycle, the rebuild and so forth, and they do what they need to do.
Todd Reynolds joins us. And so, Todd, your approach, because we got a lot of texts coming in at 833-401-1440. They're all fascinating. I really appreciate it. I know we can't go too much in depth into players currently, but what about, do you have any stories of, the trade deadline? Ritch said it doesn't happen a lot that, he engages with managers unless you have a no movement clause during that. But in your experience, have you had previous years where you as an agent got involved to help facilitate a trade?
Well, certainly there's been instances where, the player had a preference in where he
I think we might have lost Todd there for a sec. We'll try to get him back. So we'll see how that goes.
We work so closely. Should I just finish that thought?
Finish it before.
I'm not sure what he was going to say.
No, he probably had a player though, and so, like where you had to help facilitate it, right? Because if when he has a say, then that's when you were saying like it has. Yeah. You have obviously more of an impact and potential to say, okay, well, we want to go to A, B, or C. But even then, Ritch, like I like what you said earlier, because we have a lot of texters. Ritch, can you go into depth more on why you say a no movement clause really isn't worth that much?
Well, it's just because a player who knows he's not wanted, knows they would like to move him, you just don't want to be there, right? Like, I mean, how many of us have been in a working situation where you don't get along with a couple of people at work? You just got to get out of there. And I think it's just, and usually when it happens, it's not instant. It's not like, wow, I can't believe these guys are unhappy. They've been unhappy for a while. It's in the newspaper. I kept waking up and expecting Skinner and Pickard and maybe the third goalie, which they haven't picked on much lately. They're all gone, right? And so you usually hear some, little bits of rumors and rumblings. I mean, in that case, I think that's why I don't like sports talk radio to a large degree when it comes to this time of year, because if we even had 10%, 1% of 10% of the trades they talk about, like Skinner and Calvin aren't going anywhere.
Now you say that, but do you know that for sure? Like, how do you know?
You never know for sure.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like, there's just no other options out there that are any better that they can fit the salary cap. Like, this isn't like all these fantastical trades that are made up. No one really evaluates the cost. Calvin's had a great season as a backup. Well, you can argue whatever you like, but he's done really, really well, and his record stands for it. Skinner's had, some struggles, but he's been really good, like, in the playoffs. He's been really good with this team in the playoffs. Like, what are you going to do? You're not going to get Patrick Waugh. I just don't see it.
Yeah. Well, like the latest one is Binnington, and that's the one I want to ask you, Todd. Thanks for rejoining us. Because I always chuckle at it when they're in on trade talks. Well, in on trade talks could mean a GM calls a guy and says, "Hey, who do you have available? Who are you willing to trade?" Okay, thank you, and then they hang up the phone. That doesn't mean it's any.
And they may never talk again.
Yeah, right. And I'm sure, like when we talk about even signing contracts. And that was my next thing. In-season negotiations, Todd, some guys say they don't want to do it. But as the agent, some players are like, you negotiate the contract. That's what I hire you for. How do you approach if a player says, I don't really want to talk contract during the year, but then the GM calls you in March and is like, hey, I want to talk contract. How does it work? Do you just say, no, my client doesn't want to talk till the end of the year, or do you listen?
I mean, we can always listen. I don't think there's anything wrong with us listening. I think most times the player is referring to not wanting to be distracted with that intel. So we'll listen and we'll do our job. It doesn't mean we necessarily have to be sharing that with the player. Okay. if he's requested that he stays out of it, essentially. So. Or of course you can just say, look, we don't want to talk about it. We're going to wait until the end of the season and assess it at that time. It just really depends on the situation, Jason.
During the season, so tough because, and it's just different because the dynamics are like in the summer, everything's fixed. 22 goals, 47 points, nothing's changing. And when you're negotiating during the season, we'll run into situations where after 4 games with very little ice time, no production, I'm joking, but they're thinking 2-way contract, right? And then he gets a hat trick and 4 points the next game, and we think he's worth $9 million. It's a really weird dynamic to negotiate during the season because a little stretch of good luck or bad luck just changes the tenor quite a bit. We've got one particular client who can remain nameless that we're seeing that with, right? Like, and then you see a guy sign, right? Well, maybe our clients, but this guy signs and wow, you're going, holy smokes. I guess we were thinking 2, maybe it is 3, right? You don't know.
Todd Reynolds joins us, Jason Gregor, Ritch winner here in the business of sport. But we are leading up to trade deadline, and we've seen cases before, guys who are pending free agents and teams like, well, I'd like to sign him. So they try to talk contract maybe more now in the next week and tell you, guess what? We just can't come to an agreement. And then the player gets moved. Correct? So is that maybe more where the agents get involved here in the next week is with guys who are pending free agents that both sides have said, hey, I'm interested in signing here. And sometimes you just say that to be polite, I'm sure, on both occasions, but because you don't want to piss off the fan base, and I get it all. But, the in-season leading up to trade deadline negotiation, Todd, how different is it than an off-season negotiation?
Well, as Ritch already mentioned, I think those are important points. And the market, as I'm just sitting here listening, what's coming to mind for me is the market has not taken shape yet. It's a bit like agreeing to sell your house for a certain price 2 years from now. We don't know what the market's going to look like at that time. So as you sit here today, you might think, well, this player's worth, 2 million is the market. And then as signings begin to trickle in, players are signing for potentially considerably more. Well, that now reshapes the marketplace, the cluster of players that your client is in. So I'd say that's probably what makes it the most challenging in season, is it's a bit of an incomplete.
Now, what about the fact that the NHL has come out, they announced with the salary cap, not only for next year, but the next 3 years? Like, you can kind of now look and say, okay, in a few years, it's going to be 113 million. The floor is going to be basically what the ceiling was this past season, which is crazy how quickly it's going to go up over the next 3 years. Is that easier to negotiate because now like teams know what they can spend? And do you incorporate, okay, if a guy like percentage of cap today, does it automatically go into it for 4 years, or is that too simplistic?
No, I mean, I think the agents would certainly like to make that argument, we're successful sometimes doing that, Jason. Some clubs will buy into the percentage of cap position more than others, or are more comfortable with it than others. But there's more certainty, of course, now. I would say, in the industry, there's more certainty now. Some would say that that's been baked in over the last number of months or even year plus in the deals that you've seen. But I don't think there's anything like certainty to help everyone, get to the numbers that they're comfortable with.
And Todd, I think what's going to be interesting, a lot of guys at the top have locked into long-term deals, over the last couple of years. That's going to leave a lot for that middle class now, and we saw that contract signed out of Vancouver a while ago. I can't remember the kid's name. He had 8 goals. They gave him $2.5 million. I think we're going to see back to the days of the third line player making a lot more. I think we're going to see more 3s and more 4s on the third line than we have for a long time. And you'll see maybe a few 1.5 and 2s on the fourth line, because there's a lot of teams that have had this core locked up and they're weak, like the Oilers are depth-wise, like Toronto is depth-wise. Now there's going to be some competition for that pretty skilled, dynamic fourth line center,
Yeah, I don't disagree. I don't disagree. There's a lot more room, and sometimes, Jason, the problem is everybody thinks that they're the ones that are going to be the beneficiaries of that lift, right? So, there's still only so much more to go around.
Well, that's fair, right? And that's always I'm sure you guys, with your experience, I like what you said. Some teams buy into the percentage of cap, and others are like, no, like percentage of cap is one number. It doesn't mean it's the do all end all. So as an agent, you always, do you have to find the, I guess, the common ground with each individual GM / owner? And does it change from year to year? Or do you find that guys who's been a GM for 7-8 years, you kind of know what he values and what he doesn't, and how maybe that works for or against a specific type of client you have?
Ritch, do you want to speak to that, or do you want me to answer it?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's always been interesting to us on our side of the table or desk, so to speak, in the different approaches that you experience. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, we had a client who we were trying to get he was a two-way player, Jason. So he was up and down, and obviously, wanted to get a one-way contract. And we had asked for a 2-year deal that was a two-way and then a one-way. So
Right.
one of these hybrid deals.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's what we had proposed. And the team didn't say yes. They didn't say no, but they said, look, we don't think so. And, it made us sweat a little bit and called us back a week later and said, look, we're not going to do that deal, but we're going to give you a 1 year, one way. And, as you can imagine, there was like a bit of silence on our end of the phone. Did we hear that correctly?
No, that's like a better deal. I'm like, what? What am I missing here?
Right. That's what we did. We did the same thing. We're like, and you're waiting for the next part, and there was no next part. And they basically figured it out on their own for certain reasons that I won't get into here. They made the decision that that's what made the most sense for them. And you'd have other teams fight you on that, and they wouldn't give it to you. They wouldn't even give you the contract that you had proposed, that you had asked for. They'd come back with something less, and in this case, the team came back with something more. So it's always interesting to see how teams deal with these situations, and that's what makes the business so interesting.
Oh, July 1st is always fun because sometimes you just get a call. And I mean, we've been in a couple of situations, Todd, over the last few years where we weren't even really anticipating any interest whatsoever from a particular team. And they call you, and I can think of one instance where they go, okay.
Did you sign with that team?
Yeah. And I got back to Todd and we went, yeah, that's good. I had no idea. We're fighting teams over at 3.5, 4. They're not sure. And all of a sudden we're getting, closer to 6.
And also, Jason, what's interesting is you'll have teams calling you, expressing, serious interest, and you've got them as like the top 3 for a certain player, and they're all over you, and then crickets when the time comes.
Yeah.
Right.
Because our guy was 3rd. We didn't know he was 3rd on their list. We thought, gee, it sounded like he was 1st, but they're trying to keep all 3 of those players they're interested in play because they don't know if one's going to another team picking up 2. And we find out, after you go through the process, our guy might have been 5 as it plays out.
And now, because you used to have the window where you could negotiate with multiple teams leading up to free agency, right? They've closed that again. And I know that people say, well, they talked before, and I probably don't, I don't disagree with that. Well, actually, I've talked to agents who have told me they've had contracts agreed to before July 1st. However,
shame on them.
Some days it's July 1st, and you have a client who's not a big name client, and he gets an offer for whatever 3 years at $1.2 million from this team, and then some teams will say, hey, you've got certain time, yes or no. How quickly can you go through that with a player on July 1st? Because is it, do you have to say we got to make a decision, or because we've seen it lately, guys didn't sign because they're like, I'm going to get a better deal, and then it's August 1st and they don't have a contract. So in that mass rush of the non-big name players, how stressful is it for, third line, fourth line guys, number 4, 5, 6 defensemen to get an offer knowing that the other team might say, hey, this is what we offer, but you got an hour. Otherwise we're on to somebody else.
That happens. That definitely happens, and it can get pretty quiet after July 3rd.
Oh, yeah. You're not signed by July 3rd. It's a tough summer ahead, and there's nothing you can do about it because after about that first 4 or 5 days after July 1st, GMs go on vacation. They're going to evaluate their team, and you're sitting there with a young man who's got 3 little kids, and he and his wife have no idea what's going on. It's tough, and you really, hey, Todd, like after you get past July 10th, generally, you're not talking seriously with anybody until the end of August.
It's difficult. It can be a long summer. So it's very nice to get your work done early, of course. And for the players that have been through that, who then at a future point in their career have an opportunity to sign a 3-year extension, you understand why they do that. It's not a lot of fun to go through.
Guys, we got to take one quick break, but when we come back, a scenario that we saw last summer, and with the massive increases in salary cap, I'm very curious when you read your agent tea leaves, if you think it's going to become the norm. That's coming up next on The Business of Sport on Sports 1440, Oilers Nation, YouTube, Facebook, and X. Welcome back, Jason Gregor, Connor Halley. I know a lot of people are wondering because, hey, if it happens once, it's going to happen again. Offer sheets seem to be the most talked about thing that rarely happens. They did happen this past offseason, and Oilers fans definitely know all about it with Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway. And we have Ritch Winter, a regular contributor here in the business of sport. Also, Todd Reynolds, a player agent for Ray Sports. And guys, with the increase of the salary cap, it's going up $7.5 million. It's going to be $95.5 million. So, do you think with the increase, and when other RFAs who have no arbitration rights see what happened to Broberg and Holloway, I'm sure they're all hoping, hey, maybe offer sheets will happen again. Because if you look at it from a St. Louis perspective, it was great management. They get 2 young players. They gave up a second and 2/3 and a young prospect for proven NHL players. Now, they probably played better than they thought, but they project them to do well. So it's a good trade from their standpoint, and they get paid more. Do you guys think, and I'll start with you, Todd, that offer sheets are going to be more the norm, or with the increased salary cap, does it make it even less likely?
I don't see it going up personally. That's just my own opinion. Could be wrong. But clearly it worked in that instance because a club like St. Louis can project a player's role to be increased and, of course, have a higher value in their organization if they have a certain hole to fill, Jason. So it's worth it if it's worth it. Like, in other words, if you say, well, gee, we're going to get this player for that cost and he's going to provide us this sort of role in our organization, then it becomes a pretty simple decision, I think, at that point, which clearly it was for St. Louis.
I think, Todd, too, that situation last summer was on the 3rd year of a flat cap when things were really tight all over the place. I think there's just going to be enough flexibility. I don't see an offer sheet at all this year. Sure, there may be one, but I don't see any team that has enough issues that they can't solve them by dealing with. There's so many bottom feeders this year that have virtually no prospect of being a team that can challenge next year. We used to call it the Arizona dump, right? We always had the dump to deal with, right? So you could always send a player there. Marian Hossa went there in the 2nd year of his career when he had already basically retired. And there's just no, there's going to be a few more dumps this year,
Right.
Better teams, San Jose, Chicago. It's going to be a lot of opportunity for them to buy into the future and pick up a first or a second to fix the salary cap problem.
We know that NHL teams have their whiteboard in the summer, right? They have a whiteboard. This is what we need. We're looking to improve our team. Yada. Do you, as an agent, do you guys have your whiteboard and say, okay, if I have, and I'll just I know that he's under contract, so it's easy for me to use an example, Todd, Zach Hyman, right? So Zach Hyman isn't going to be a free agent this summer. But when he was there a whiteboard that had, okay, Edmonton, teams that he wants to go to, teams that we think he's going to go to? Do you have your own whiteboard for players, and do you fill that out like weeks before free agency?
In some cases, yes, because you have a strong indication that the player just won't return to his club for whatever reason, Jason. But in a case like Zach Hyman's, I think the intention, the work was really to try to make it fit in Toronto, and of course, ultimately, it did not. But in some cases, you just know it's not going to work beyond the current season. So you put that list together with the player. For a number of different reasons. Maybe, his wife's a country music star and he wants to go play in Nashville, something like that. But there's
who you're talking about
Never
there,
happened
huh?
to you, Todd?
Jeez.
there's all kinds of different, driving factors that cause a player to want to play in a certain city.
So in the case of Zach, when you said you tried to make it work in Toronto, how down to the wire did you get, and then how quickly do you have to pivot?
I think we worked on it probably, diligently right up to the week before, really. And what can happen is a player and his family can get, deal fatigue, essentially, negotiating fatigue, and just say, this is getting silly, or this is dragging on too long, or I can't believe they won't do that. They did it on these other players, things of that nature. And then eventually they start to sort of turn off, if you will. They just say, well, I think the ship has sailed, and that's what happens in some of these cases is before July 1st they've left in their own mind.
You must have to be maybe a little bit of psychologist, because some players are like, it almost feels like a breakup in a way. They're like, man, this is where I've been. I really wanted to stay here, and oh my God, they're not bringing me back.
Definitely, and sometimes it takes July 1st and other teams shaping the marketplace for your client. Essentially, I think back to Chris Neil with the Ottawa Senators. Long time, tough guy, great player. Could play, and also was extremely physical. Spent his whole career in Ottawa, and he had to go through free agency. I mean, he had to re-sign with Ottawa on July the 1st after other teams were involved, just to get it to the point where it was serious that he may leave.
Okay.
And all the while he was very clear, as we were, that he wanted to stay in Ottawa. That was the goal. He wanted to remain there, but the numbers just weren't there, and that's what it took.
Well, and teams sometimes they really play on that. Come on, Todd. He doesn't want to go anywhere, right? Right. He doesn't really want to go.
And that's part of I'm sure that's the gamesmanship, where they're going to try to call your bluff. You're going to try to call their bluff, right? And then have you ever had, either one of you, where a team called your bluff and it didn't work out? And then, like, what do you say to your player, or the players? Do they always know, like, whatever cards you're playing, it's at the approval of your player?
I think if they know us well enough in our relationship, our rapport with our players, then yes, they know that there's no undermining that, essentially, Jason. But some players have had 3, 4, 5 agents, and I think they wonder in those cases how solid the relationship is.
Ritch, you?
Well, I don't have anything to add to that, really, but I think it's interesting that, they will play. I mean, in a situation, I mean, I think the multiple agent situation factors in a lot to character too, right? Do we want a guy that, loyalty is a big thing in hockey. And at the end of the day,
but sometimes a player isn't getting, proper representation or enough engagement, especially, at times I think it's harder from a bigger agency. So how do you approach that then? Is that lack of loyalty, or is it just a player maybe saying, hey, I need better treatment?
Well, I think that should be always the primary factor. I mean, if my dentist doesn't do molars, I'm not, I'm going to go to another dentist. I mean, I think loyalty is a good thing certainly when someone's doing a good job. And I've said to players that are interested in perhaps retaining us, if you already have a red car and I'm just selling you a blue car, let's just quit this conversation, because it doesn't make any sense if you're generally happy. But is there something you're not getting? That's usually the first questions we're asking a player that's unhappy with his agent. Like, what is it you think we can do for you? What is it you're missing? And sometimes you're just doing a terrible job. I mean, I remember I got Ilya Bryzgalov. I went for lunch or coffee with him because his agent or his financial guy said he wasn't happy with this big agency he was with. I said to my wife, we're on vacation. I promise not to do anything other, really focus on just enjoying some relaxing. I said, honey, he's going to get like $60 million. It's probably a complete waste of my time, but it's coffee. He's not like, it's not serious, but I got to go. So I went and he hired me a coffee. His agent hadn't called him for 3 or 4 months. So you just never know. And usually it's circumstantial. There's 2 ways of getting a new client. It's always based on one factor. He's unhappy.
Right.
Now, he's either unhappy the minute you call him, and it's obvious, or after you share with him what you think we could do for him, he becomes unhappy, right? Because they don't leave if they're happy. It's like a marriage, you're happy and you don't need to shop around. And but a lot of times, and sometimes you just need a different voice. One player, I'm really good friends with Kurt Overhart, who's one of my competitors, and one of his clients called me, and I kept saying, well, Kurt's he's great. He's a great guy. He's a great agent. Call him back. And then 3 months later, he called me again. And after he finally, the 3rd time, I phoned Kurt and said, Kurt, he said, Ritch, I just think, I appreciate that you've really been pushing him, to be loyal and stay here, but he needs another voice. He just needs another voice. Sometimes my voice, Todd's voice, Kurt's voice, it just gets worn out, right? And sometimes they just need a different perspective.
Because sometimes a player might have an opinion of himself that maybe isn't reflective of what he is as an actual
Really?
player. And
That's never really. Have you seen that, Todd?
On occasion.
Yeah, the odd time. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that will
How
happen.
does that guy get that kind of money? Well,
Yeah.
I mean, he had 4 times as many goals as you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got more opportunity.
Quickly, guys. So, Todd, with 9 days to go before the trade deadline, is there anything like what's on your plate? Do you approach it differently? Are you pretty relaxed this year? Yeah, I know.
To Arizona to sit by the pool.
Yeah, like I don't think I was looking at your list. You don't have a lot of guys that should be heavy players in it, correct?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, we'll always check in with our clients, see what they're hearing, check in with the teams, and just see if there's anything that we should expect. Sometimes media personalities will call us and either offer us some intel or ask us what's going on with certain players. They may have heard things of that nature, but I think this year for us as a group, it will be quiet, but time will tell.
Yeah.
Well, Todd, as always, really appreciate it. Enjoy shoveling with your Jeep, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks. See you, Jason. Bye, Rich. Thanks, guys.
There you go. That's Todd Reynolds from Ray Sports. Ritch Winter joins us every Wednesday here on Sports 1440. That's the business of sport. Well, Ritch, it'll be 48 hours when we talk to you next before the NHL trade deadline. Actually, just under. So there'll probably be some trades done by then. So we'll talk about that. And we have another.
Yeah, and we'll probably have 5 or 6 players trade and look like complete buffoons today. But we'll.
Oh, well, that'll be great. Then we'll get one of them on the show. So that'll be fun.
Yeah, we'll have 6 new goalies in Edmonton. It'll be great.
We'll talk to you next Wednesday, Rich. Have a good one.